To one of the most disastrous examples of our governments putting the environment above people and using dodgy green science as their excuse. I'm not talking about global warming this time, the Murray Darling Basin. It is the great southeastern river system where farms, many irrigated, grow 40% of our food by value. But here is the amazing thing. Our governments, state and federal, have decided to take water off those farmers. In fact, the Murray Darling Basin Authority has been given $10 billion just to flush more water down the rivers, to make sure that 70% of that water does not go down the Darling and the Murray, that does go down them, can't be used by humans. Now, you may think, fair enough. 70%, fair enough. We've got to take some water from farmers to keep the rivers healthy. But first of all, of course, doing that in the middle of another drought, well, that is devastating for farming towns. They see full rivers and dusty farms. But more importantly and more scandalously, what if a lot of that water taken from farmers was then completely wasted? What if it was used not to keep rivers healthy, but to keep a naturally salty or brackish lake artificially fresh? And justifying that by quoting clearly wrong science. I'm talking here about the colossal amount of water that the MDBA flushes right down to the end of the Murray to some giant lakes, particularly Lake Alexandrina, which it insists must be kept fresh, and that enough of that farmer's water goes down the Murray to also keep the mouth to the sea open. Now, before I tell you the most outrageous part of this, here, put the picture, is a bit of a terrific three-part video on this problem by Topher Field, a filmmaker that I've featured here before, and he explains the problem, and this is worth watching.
Now, the Murray doesn't flow directly out to sea. It flows first into Lake Alexandrina in South Australia. These lower lakes may be the end of the Murray, but they're the source of the problem. When they talk about keeping the Murray mouth open, they're not talking about where the Murray flows into Lake Alexandrina. They're talking about where Lake Alexandrina meets the Southern Ocean, and that detail matters. You see, the lower lakes, of which Lake Alexandrina is one, well, they're not really lakes. At least they didn't used to be until we built these barrages in the 1930s. Before that, ocean water used to mix with fresh water here in these lakes, and a wide variety of salt and freshwater fish were caught here all the time. But all that changed when we built a series of barrages across the mouth of the estuary, turning it into a freshwater lake cut off from the ocean. What was meant to be a simple change that would guarantee freshwater supply for local towns and local farms has since turned into one of the most wasteful and destructive decisions in the history of the Murray-Darling Basin. Lake Alexandrina alone is huge, nearly 12 times the surface area of Sydney Harbour, and then of course you've got Lake Albert as well. Official estimates are that 850 gigalitres of water evaporates off Lake Alexandrina alone every year. That means that just to keep Lake Alexandrina topped up, we have to send that much water down the Murray into Lake Alexandrina every single year.
Now, I'll put the rest of Topher Field's reports on my blog later tonight. Worth watching. And what he just said there was shocking enough. The money wasted just from the evaporation from this huge, shallow and warm lake is so much that if we use it for irrigation instead, we could grow billions of dollars more food. But what makes it even worse is that this decision to keep Lake Alexandrina fresh is based on a highly controversial claim that those lakes at the end of the Murray always were fresh, naturally fresh. And so, as activists say, of course, they should be kept that way, using farmers' water. Now, that claim comes from a study by 3 scientists, which was not peer-reviewed, but published online by the South Australian government, which said that the majority of the lake has been fresh for its entire history. Now, that claim was then taken up with the Murray Darling Basin Authority to justify keeping Lake Alexandrina fresh, using farmers' water. But that claim has now been challenged by another scientist in a new paper published by the CSIRO, a paper by Professor Peter Gell. Now, he writes that he actually worked on a paper just 2 years earlier with the very same 3 scientists who now claim that Lake Alexandrina was usually fresh. And he says all of them agreed in that earlier paper, 2 years earlier, that Lake Alexandrina actually used to be often salty or brackish from the sea. And so Professor Gell's actually amazed that these 3 scientists now have changed their mind, because he says, not just that it's at odds with the conclusions reached by papers with the same lead author in 2002 and 2007, but because their change of mind is based on no new evidence other than provided by one sample from the Goolwa Channel, which clearly was estuarine anyway, salty. Okay, your head may be spinning here. You've got these scientists over here say this giant lake used to be fresh, so let's keep it that way. You've got this other scientist now saying, no, it was salty, so who is right? In fact, the overwhelming evidence suggests Professor Gell is. Go back more than a century, there was a Royal Commission on the River Murray that did find that Lake Alexandrina historically was salty. Or fast forward now to another scientific paper published just 5 months ago that also says the sea in the past would have flooded those lakes. In fact, gone quite a way up the Murray itself. So let's sum up. Your government is spending billions of your dollars to take water off farmers. That means pain for farming towns right now. It means less food grown for the country. And our governments do this idiocy by, this idiocy of taking water to change a huge salt lake into a fresh one by relying on one highly controversial study that they cherry-picked. And why? Because this was the one study they could find that preached the green message. Ignore all the rest. This is insane. And it is also a kind of economic suicide.